What makes shots like these look so much different than these? Today, we'll figure out what cinematographers are doing to achieve this look, and by the end of this short video, you'll know how to apply it to your own work. What stands out in these great-looking shots is the depth within the image. Using different tools available, cinematographers are able to create a three-dimensional look in a two-dimensional image. Shots with depth bring the viewer into the scene. Let's break down a few shots from some movies to get a better understanding of this idea. Here is a frame from 1917 shot by Roger Deakins. The source of light is coming in on the left side of the frame through the opening of the bunker and lighting the subject's face. It's a nice soft light and positioned so that there is a shadow on the right side of the subject's face. The shadow adds dimension. You can really see the difference if I pull the shadows away. Another factor that sticks out to me is the background of the scene. The sandbags that are piled up along the left side of the frame create an opening, allowing for more light to enter the bunker. There is a dark stack and a light stack. The layers of light create depth in the shot. Along with the sandbags, the soldiers are strategically placed, allowing viewers to see the true length of the room. Next up is a frame from Amsterdam shot by Emmanuel Lubezki. Just like the shot from 1917, the light is positioned to show a shadow on the subject's face. What sticks out to me here in this shot for why it has depth are two things. First, the framing includes the corner of the room. You can see how the lines from the ceiling and the walls create a box where you can really feel that you're in the room. Second, the color contrast between the daylight skin, tungsten light, and green walls. The different colors work with each other to create a distinction between each other. Nothing blends together. It helps the viewer to see the different layers in the shot. Finally, here's a shot from Ford vs Ferrari, DP'd by Phaedon Papamichael. The lighting is positioned slightly different here than the shots we've seen so far. It's still on an angle towards the subject, but there is more wrap, meaning that more of the face is lit. Also, the light is a little bit more overhead. You can see the shadows under the nose and under the chin. But the important thing to take away, since we are talking about depth, is that there are shadows on the faces. It's not flat lighting. The final note I have about this shot is the camera position. Instead of shooting this as a straight-on wide shot and having everyone at the same level from left to right, the decision was made to move in at an angle and show the length of the factory. Okay, you saw how depth is created in those shots, but now you might be wondering how you could achieve depth. To make this easy, I thought that I would share a few tools. At least that's what I'm calling them. Basically, anything that can be changed, added, and/or removed within a frame will be considered a tool. If we went through every single tool that could be added to a shot to add depth, we'd be here all day. I'll be focusing on the main ones that I typically focus on myself. My goal is to quickly share what I've learned and then get you on your way so that you can start putting this into practice. Real quick before getting into these tools, you don't need to use every single one in every single shot. Pick and choose based on time, budget, and the look you're going for. Where the subject of a scene is positioned dramatically affects whether or not there is depth in a shot. When trying to create depth, the main goal when blocking is to create distance between what is in the frame. Like I mentioned before, we're going for the three-dimensional look in our two-dimensional image. If you're in a general indoor location and you have a subject right up against the wall, you won't find much depth. An easy tip is to separate the subject from the wall. You can also go a step further and try shooting into the corner like you see here. The leading lines can be a nice touch. If the scene you're shooting allows for it, use blocking to your advantage. As we're focusing on how to create depth, blocking brings me to the next tool, location. It matters where you're shooting. Sometimes you won't have the flexibility to location scout. But if you do, here are the types of locations that you should be searching for. Most importantly, like I mentioned with blocking, choose a location that allows you to separate the subject from the background. Let's say you're planning on having 3 subjects in a wide shot, and then you plan on moving in for 3 individual close-ups. Try out each shot in the potential location. Make sure you can achieve the depth you're looking for with each shot. Also, find a location that has character. Do everything you can to avoid shooting into boring, empty walls. There's a lot more to consider about location scouting for production, but this video is strictly focused on creating depth. Now for color. What the subject is wearing compared to the rest of the frame can have a huge impact. If you're shooting in a dark room and you want your subject to blend in, have them wear black clothing. If you want them to stand out, have them wear a brighter color. The more that the subject stands out from the background, the more depth there will be. Although, you might not always do this because your scene might not call for your subject to stand out. Let's talk about lighting. There is a lot to say about the relationship between lighting and depth. I'm gonna do my best to address this in 3 points. Number 1, lighting the subject. Number 2, adjustments. And number 3, separation. All right, lighting the subject. Something we took away with the examples from pro cinematographers was how the subject was lit. The key light was placed in a spot that added shadows to the subject. If you're going for depth, avoid placing the light directly in front of the subject. It'll be flat and have no contrast. Try placing the source of light at 45 degrees from the camera with the subject as the anchor point while shooting into the shadows closest to you. You don't have to do this, but it's definitely an easy way to add depth. Here's shooting into the shadows versus not shooting into the shadows. Big difference. Some other options include split lighting, overhead lighting, and silhouettes. It all depends on your scene and the tone you're going for, but these are all good options for depth. Since we are going pretty quick, I'll give a recap of everything so far. Move the subject away from the background, choose a location with character, and light the subject in a way that adds shadows. Now for adjustments. When lighting the subject in a way that adds shadows to the face, maybe you aren't getting the results that you're looking for. Maybe you need more shadow and a higher contrast between the brightest and the darkest part of the subject. For this, let's bring in some negative fill. I'll be using a floppy, but you could also use mostly any black material. Position the negative fill on the opposite side of the key light. You'll find more shadow on the subject's face. Now for separation. There are a few ways to create even more depth within a shot. First is a back or hair light. This is a simple shot without any backlight. When I turn it on, you can see how it distinguishes the subject from the background. You could even take this a step further by using different color temperatures with the lights. I'll change the backlight to a nice and warm 3200 Kelvin. It's different than the daylight key. As we go through setting up our scenes, we'll get into even more detail about lighting. While we're talking about separation, I need to mention depth of field. It typically gets bunched in when talking about depth. I would argue that the tools I mentioned are much more important to understand. Yes, it does play a role in creating depth and you should utilize it. But if you aren't creating depth with blocking, location, color, and lighting, then you're missing out on something very important. Take a look at these 2 shots. The first is shot using an aperture of 1.8, but I did not use any of the tools I talked about. The second shot is using an aperture of 5.6, but I used all of the tools I talked about. Which actually has more depth? I would say that the second does. Hopefully you can see my point here. Don't get caught up thinking that using an f-stop of 1.8 will magically make your shot have depth. Let's put these tools to practice with a couple of examples. First up, a daytime interior shot, and then after, another interior shot, but dark and moody. I wanted to try out a standard close-up in a basic looking room. After finding a general idea of the framing, I sat down so I could assess the issues with the shot. The only light right now is coming from the sunlight through a window. I chose this angle so that I could motivate from that light and shoot into the corner for depth. I first added a blanket to the back of the couch. With the couch being the same color as the wall, they blended together and looked flat. I repositioned the angle of the camera to show less of the lamp and added in negative fill for more contrast. Here's what the shot looks like now. For lighting the subject, I added a shower curtain over the shears on the window to soften the light from the sun even more. Then I brought in an aperture 300x with a softbox and grid. I used this to fill in and wrap light on the subject's face. I made sure to maintain shadows on the face. Since it is daytime, I bounced some light in the room off of the ceiling using an aperture 60x. I wanted to fill in the shadows on the wall that looked unnatural. Here's the final shot. Now for the garage. I knew I was going to light the scene using an overhead light acting as a work light. I threw up the Suray A100B on a boom arm and positioned it over the table. I set it to 4500 Kelvin and set my camera to the same. I brought the table as far away as I could from the wall. Once I locked down the framing, I added some tools to the table. Here's what the shot looks like now. There needs to be something done to separate the subject from the background. I could add a backlight to the subject, but I'm doing my best to light naturally, and there wouldn't be any motivation for that. Instead, I decided to add some ambience in the room and play off of the light overhead. I set the light to 6500 Kelvin. It adds a nice color difference between the background and the subject, but doesn't look different enough where you think it could be another source of light. Let's check out the progression of lighting. If you've made it this far, hopefully you've learned something new. The thing is, you won't get any better at making your shots have depth unless you challenge yourself and practice. So I challenge you to make a setup of your own within the next week. Plan it, shoot it, and learn from your mistakes. I'll catch you in the next one. See you, friends.